I've already got the tools from Way of Impeccability at my disposal. And now that I have this understanding of some underlying things going on,
Yeah.
I can just apply those tools in that specific context. So.
Right. You have replacements, which is important.
Right.
That's the biggest downside or the problem or the flaw in regular psychology. They aren't focused on replacement.
Right.
It's a big problem.
Let's see. What else have I been working on about this? Seems like there's been a ton of stuff. I'm trying to.
How is Kathy before you tell me more?
Oh, she's good. She's really good.
Oh, good.
I'm
fond of Kathy by proxy.
Yes.
Very fond of her.
Absolutely. Okay, let me go get settled down over here. Speaking of ADHD, trying to do these things and then think about what I'm trying to say at the same time is not working very well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There we go.
Simple things, toasted cheese on a bagel with a bit of ketchup. Most delicious.
Nice.
Mm. The ketchup makes me cough, though. I guess some fumes from the ketchup gets me in my lungs.
Oh, nice. Oh, gosh. Oh, goodness.
Vinegar in the ketchup.
I'm having some homegrown tomato.
Oh, delicious. I've got one tomato left. That's why I had the ketchup. Because I only wanted to have half a bagel and I had a spare half bagel, but I didn't want to use half a tomato, so I used the ketchup.
Nice. These are all from our tomato plants here. They're sitting here ripening.
Oh, wow. Wow. Brilliant.
Lots of tomatoes.
I like growing tomatoes. I seldom manage to succeed, but I do like it when I do.
Well, we finally have succeeded this year because Joe built these ridiculous fortresses to grow the tomatoes in so that the squirrels wouldn't get them.
Yeah. So I was thinking that I'm next season I'll get I suppose it's not too late, really. Still a lot of time left. I could go and buy already grown plant, just with little tomatoes, and I'll try that next time I go out go shopping. And I thought to put it in the window on the dashboard of the motorhome.
Oh,
because that's like lots of sun. It'll be like in a hothouse. It'll go crazy over there. But it'll be protected from predators. Insects may get it, but
right.
The motorhome is generally pretty sealed, but when sometimes I open the door and leave the screen door closed, and even though the screen door is 100%, there's no flaws in it, it doesn't seal 100%. So they can still come in.
Right.
Anyway, you were saying though, this whole point, I'm keen to hear just as an overview that to understand that sometimes a bit of chemical adjustment may be appropriate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, in terms of dopamine, in your research, before you tell me what ADHD is, or you understand it to be, rather, I want to hear what you understand it to be, and all the ins and outs of all the stuff you've learned. I'm just curious, real quick, to know if it's perhaps associated with some kind of vitamin deficiency.
Some kind of a what?
A vitamin deficiency.
I haven't come across. Get out of here! I haven't come across anything specifically about vitamin deficiencies in what I've seen so far, but it's possible.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting that'd be really interesting to know, because I've seen it so often how the things which are major problems, they just basically resolve down to vitamin deficiencies.
Right.
Because this is something that is a very known problem. Our diets are so artificial that we lead to vitamins, and it's been for a long time. Right. If you think of the way we used to eat or the way animals eat,
right,
we're always eating ground.
Mm-hmm.
soil in some way, and they pick up the vitamins. We eat all this washed food. We don't get that anymore. We peel fruit, where all that stuff is there. So it's really not. We don't get the vitamins and minerals that we need to get. So when I say vitamin deficiency, mineral, same thing. Both. So our diets don't have that capability in that we've had for so long. So.
Right.
Very powerful, very powerful.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part
to look into it to see if there is some kind of vitamin or mineral deficiency that helps to boost dopamine production.
Right. It's a distinct possibility.
Yeah,
And I mean, that's something I have thought about for a long time, about diet, and I really want to get to a place where we're eating mostly whole food diet and not so much processed food. That's harder to do as a vegan if you want to get protein. I mean, it's very easy to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, but the protein aspect is more difficult. But
correct. Yeah,
it's something I'm working.
You have to pay particular attention. And like I said, even no matter how balanced your diet is, we still need to supplement it because we're not eating that raw earth that we would otherwise eat. So yeah. I remember my father saying this when we were kids and we'd eat the earth. He said, leave it. It's a good thing. It's not negative. Right. First of all, it helps to clean out your systems, this roughage. And secondly, you're going to get the vitamins and minerals.
Right.
So yeah, it's very interesting. He said, leave it alone. It's not a negative. We go, ew, but it's actually not a negative thing to do at all.
Oh dear.
Yeah. But that is one of the few things that actually, and I was very young when he said this, I remember, and that actually impressed me because of the sensibility of it.
Right.
That he was able to actually, in that case, go past the emotional aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But when it came to ego and status, he was completely consumed by it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It was a rare exception, but still.
Yes.
He did have that ability to have his rationality surpass his emotions, unfortunately. But it made him a pathological, though. Yeah. A psychopath. He's a functioning psychopath. Yeah. Quite fascinating. So, interesting. Beside the tomatoes, what are you eating, by the way?
I'm eating some vegan taquito things.
You need to get some cream, some vegan cream.
I have some.
Chop up some tomatoes and put it in there with lots of salt and pepper.
Oh, you mean cream.
Yeah. To make tomatoes and cream, in other words. That's all it is. It's just finely chopped tomato with salt and pepper, lots of salt and pepper. You have to put more than you would normally think you'd put in it. That is only do this if you generally, when you eat your tomatoes, if you put salt and pepper on your tomatoes. Yeah. Then some people don't. They don't like salt and pepper on the tomatoes. They eat them sweet. In other words, this is a very savory dish.
Yeah, I like savory tomatoes.
Yeah, so then try it. Find some substitute cream and use that. It's unbelievable. You can't believe how nice it is, Erica. Really.
I'll see what I can find.
Yeah. It's quite exceptional in how delicious it is.
Yeah.
Quite magical. Very cool.
I will eat homegrown tomatoes in just about any form.
There you go. I mean, you'll really thank me for this. I'm almost positive. I haven't met anybody who didn't like tomatoes, who had them with salt and pepper, who once they tried this didn't think it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Really, really exceptional. Yeah.
Oh. Let's see. Where were we headed? Yeah. One thing that's been interesting that's come up in my just thinking things through with ADHD, that again makes me extremely grateful for just the timing of all of this and the fact that
Yes.
I had already started in Way of Impeccability, that I already had a background understanding of these concepts.
Yes.
Something that came up for me that's been interesting is I definitely have a recognition and awareness of my tendency to hyperfixate on things.
So all right. So hyperfixate. Sorry to interrupt you there. But I do like to catch things right in there. Sometimes they're important. Maybe a different terminology, right? Just to immerse, to fully immerse.
Sure.
You have a tendency for immerse, right? Because fixate tends to lock in a negative connotation to it. Yes.
Right. Well,
If
but
we understand it.
that's part of.
Oh.
I mean, to me, that's part of the thing, is that I think there can be appropriate applications of that, like with immersion, but I think there are
Yes.
also, I have certainly experienced
Yes.
inappropriate
Yes.
hyperfixation.
Yes.
So in that case,
Yes.
that term
So-
is
right.
appropriate.
Right. So we have a capacity for inordinate immersion, which needs to be managed.
Right.
Because it's a positive, but it could also be a negative, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about that, one of the things that popped into my head the other day was, I think my tendency to do that and sort of jump from becoming super, super immersed in one thing and then all of a sudden just, bouncing completely off that and going into something else, combined with my supreme difficulty in making decisions. I've always had such an aversion to making decisions, having to choose between, if I felt like I was pressured into some sort of decision that was just like the absolute worst possible scenario for me, all of this sort of made me stop and think, do I actually know what I like, what I'm interested in, what I want? Has my hyperfixation led me to become immersed in things that I'm not actually all that interested in? It's just that this is something new and exciting. And is that why that's a big part of hyperfixation, is getting into something and then just dropping it and moving on to the next thing. But when I've done that, and I have all of these hobbies that I'll get started on and then, stop for a long time and then maybe come back to, are those things that I'm actually interested in? Or is it just something that was, new and stimulating and whatever for me, and I've just sort of bounced around from shiny thing to shiny thing, and I don't actually have any real knowledge of what I'm actually interested in. And so that's been interesting. It's been interesting thinking about that. It's been interesting thinking about
very interesting
the complication that has potentially had in terms of me figuring out what I want to do as a career.
Yes.
Is that part of why I have no clue what I want to do, because I'm too busy sort of bouncing around between all of these different things. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and about how, again, I'm really grateful that I had already started on this process of sort of acceptance, and not even just acceptance, but because I think acceptance sort of infers like acquiescence to a certain degree of like, I'm accepting the bad along with the good. So maybe not necessarily acceptance, but just perspective change on myself, seeing all
Yeah.
parts of myself as part of good, as part of a good, valid whole, as part of a moreness, that is helping me so much with, I mean, I think a big part of what was happening with shadow work for me was digging down into
Yes.
things that I had categorized as bad or that I had shoved down into shadow, and really examining those, pulling them up, seeing them in a different way, starting to incorporate that. And I think that process is helping me better understand, what do I actually want?
Yes.
Who am I?
Yes.
What it actually interests me, being
Yes.
able to pull all of these things up to the surface. So I
Yes.
think I am figuring that out. I think I am in the process of figuring that out. But it's really interesting to consider how ADHD may play a role in that process, that, it may not just
Yes.
be me consciously suppressing things that I associated as bad. It can also be sort of, I mean, an attention, right? An inappropriate attention issue where I'm not really focusing on the things that are interesting. I'm focusing on whatever shiny thing happens to grab my attention, stimulate, get me feeling excited or whatever. So that's been really interesting, just really deliberately thinking about, what do I want? What interests me? What
Yes.
what do I actually enjoy spending my time on? Not just from a holistic perspective, but adding in this factor of ADHD being a possibility,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
added a really interesting element to this whole
Yeah.
discovery.
Yeah. So when we look at immersion and we couple it with association,
Mm-hmm.
right, then we can very easily see how we can come to believe that we like, love, enjoy certain things, or that
Right,
they're important and
right.
necessary. Plus, when we combine that, with conditioned living, should and all this, it really messes up
Mm,
our associations with what we like and don't like, and
100.
becomes a big deal. So
Yep.
yes, when we really relook at this and we start to redo everything, we start to discover a whole different logic to everything when it comes to what we like and don't
Right,
like, and
right.
what really is important to us. All right. So having said all that, now that we're going to relook at attunement,
Mm-hmm.
this becomes a big, 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 big deal. Attunement, because I suspect, just because of many understandings and awarenesses and insights when it comes to who you are. I suspect that the more you go along and investigate your wants and desires and likes and what's important to you, you're going to find that you don't really have any.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's good reason for it, because when we start to have mood management and emotional control, it doesn't really matter. One thing is as good
Mm,
as another. We can start to relate to anything. We can pretty much, through some discipline and focus and attention and mind management and all the different managers, emphasis, all that stuff, right? We can basically like anything, right? So when we start to understand this, now this is where attunement really, really comes into it. So then we end up liking and focusing on what we like as that which comes to us via attunement.
right. Well, and
And now it becomes a magical thing. Now those become sacred and spiritual and more and awesome, etc.,
right.
etc. Right?
That's
Make
been
sense?
one of the really interesting things to me about attunement. And, part of what has been really positive for me, I think, is an outcome of, speaking of which, um, something that's been really positive as an outcome of this whole rehashing of the Narwhal thing and everything that happened way back in the day, and the smiley face and all of that, has been that attunement, I'm really coming to understand attunement for me as just whatever captures my attention. And that's
Yes,
so interesting to think about that from an ADHD perspective,
yes,
that, you know, since ADHD does have a major association with attention,
yes,
it's really interesting to think about attunement being so closely related to attention as well.
yes.
But that's definitely something that I'm understanding. And I mean, kind of ironic that for me, the first big attunement thing that came along after my new understanding of attunement was ADHD. So that's interesting. But
Yeah, very,
but
very.
Joe, before I forget, the other day I was upstairs going through boxes and I came across my giant tote of old pictures.
Oh,
And
goody.
check out what I found.
Oh, one moment. I'm just making coffee and doing the delicate business of getting the exact right portion of Mari biscuits.
Mm,
It's not always easy to do. I'm trying to get just 2 out, not 3, but it wants to give me 3 or 1.
nice.
Yeah, delicate, important operations. All right. Let's see. Oh, yes, that's the
Okay.
thing. All right, Erika Jane. Make your fuller screen here. Wow.
This is, do you see the smiley? This is the picture that I was telling you about, that this was etched in the bed frame. And I
Wow.
saw it and I walked up and took a picture because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy.
So the white line is like a scratch mark?
Yeah, it was like etched in the
And it
wood.
looks like a scar.
Right. Yeah, it was etched in the wood. So there's the two, here's the eyes
Yeah.
and the knee. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Nope, you're not crazy, Erika. You're
I know
not
it was
crazy.
so interesting. I was like, I found the picture. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
wild.
Wow. Much appreciated. Wow.
Pretty
Wow.
wild.
Yeah. Wow. Oh. So when we look at attunement in the context of attention,
Mm-hmm.
that's what saved me. I understood that I am using my power of attention or immersion
Mm-hmm.
inappropriately.
Right.
I'm getting consumed in bubbles, and
Right.
those bubbles were messing me up.
Right.
Now, I would get a hiding if I did that. So I didn't want to get a hiding. So, I will use that. I realized, like, well, if I'm going to get stuck in these bubbles, I'm going to get hidings because, I managed to save myself a couple of times preemptively, but I said, this is as a pattern, this ain't going to work.
Right.
So I was kind of horrified at this. So that forced me into shifting my attention to be focused on a bigger picture.
Right.
I'm using the same mechanism. I'm just leveraging it. That's the key shift. That's it. Just shift the context. Yeah. And that's what attunement is. It is a full, thorough, utter immersion into the greater context possible. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
The overall workings of things rather than the local workings.
Makes sense.
Once I started that shift, that's when all the stuff started to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That was the magic shift. To be hyper attentive to the biggest picture possible.
Yeah, I like it.
Right? So and this is one of the things that I really pride myself on, or take great joy in, or being thrilled that I succeeded in doing, is to turn a negative into a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the words I used back then was to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. I use it as a very deliberate strategy. So now ADHD, which typically is a disadvantage, becomes an advantage.
Right.
because it's only a disadvantage if we're focusing on it locally, right? And it becomes a bubble. But when it's the overview, and now it's a power, not a
Right.
limitation.
Right.
As I said, I don't really want to mess with my whatever it is. The only thing I want to remedy is the sleep.
Right.
That's the rest I'm all happy with. That, I've made it work for me through this emphasis, attention management, awareness, attunement. Every single thing now I realize is a strategy for dealing with this. And it's all magically appropriate. I just want to sleep.
Part of what's been really interesting in this, and the timing has been interesting because Joe has been out of town all week. He actually got back late last night, but
so you had some, you by necessity you were sleeping alone.
Yes, I was. But one of the interesting things with all of this has been recognizing, so I think we talked about this on Tuesday, but Joe never says, he rarely says much anyway, like just a man of few words, but he also very, very rarely complains. I don't know whether he just has like an inordinate amount of patience or whether he just has gotten really good at like internalizing and not saying anything. I don't know, but he rarely vocalizes any kind of complaint, issue, whatever. So when he and I started talking about the ADHD thing, when I started really researching it, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I think this is related. I think this is related. And he said, I'm pretty sure we talked about this Tuesday, but he said, I really need you to basically not hyper fixate on this and then do nothing. Like I really need you to follow through on like going and talking to a doctor about this and trying to work on this, because I'm recognizing that the things that you're saying are related to ADHD are things that stress him out. And which was, interesting. I mean, there were some things that I knew sort of bothered him, but it was interesting that he was sort of finally vocal.
Yeah, he articulated.
And it's been, that's been a really interesting part of this process. I think it's difficult in and of itself to wrap your head around all of these potential implications, changes, whatever, from something like this just for yourself. But then when you add in a partner who, lives with you, does everything with you, and especially someone who is totally not, Joe is like as far opposite from ADHD as you could get. And so it's very hard for him to understand what I'm talking about. I think it's hard for him to understand, what I'm even experiencing. And so that's been a really interesting part of this whole thing so far. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. That a big part of why this has been a really good thing for me, and learning about ADHD and making that potential connection has been really positive for me, is because, like I said, I've already been doing a lot of work on sort of coming to a place of peace with these things that are different with me. And like you said, seeing this as a leveraging tool, as a strategy, is something that's actually beneficial, and working on the things that you would like to have be different, but that in many cases, a lot of this is actually a good thing. But it complicates things when you have a partner who is not that way and is struggling with those aspects of yourself. So this is something, he and I really haven't gotten a chance to talk about a lot of this stuff because he's been out of town. So that's something that I think is going to be an interesting part of this journey. Is I do want to find out more about this, find out if there are certain things that can be adjusted, whatever. But in large part, I am recognizing that a lot of these things are parts of me. I mean, there are certainly inappropriate and can be inappropriate expressions of it, but in large part, it really comes down to just how I experience the world. I experience the world in a different way than
Yes.
some other people do, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It can be problematic when you're living in a world that was designed for people who don't think like you, but it doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean it's something that needs to be removed or completely changed. But with Joe, you know, knowing that there are things that are problematic for him, that throws an interesting thing into the mix.
Yes.
So,
Yes. So if I heard Joe through you, just my 2 cents here, perspective, opinion, don't put too much into it. But I sort of think I'm hearing him say, "Don't make a mountain out of a molehill."
no, he was saying the
No.
opposite.
Then I misheard. Okay, that's what I'm
He
checking.
was saying, one of the things that I was saying to him when I was going through all the ADHD symptoms and everything was about hyperfixation and how, you tend to get really immersed in some one thing for a while, as long as it's new and exciting. And then you'll go off on a total tangent, find something else, and not ever finish this thing that you've first started. And I tend to do that with a lot of my hobbies and interests. And the whole decision, getting overwhelmed with decisions, and there's a major connection with ADHD there as well. Lack of organizational skills, all these different things. And he was saying, I know, I agree that you have a tendency to get really caught up in something for a little while and then go off on a tangent and not come back to it. And I really want to make sure that you don't do that with ADHD. He said, I need you to follow through on this. I need you.
That's I got you. Okay, so that's a different point then.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
need you
it's
to
the
go
following
see a
through that's the
doctor.
issue.
I
I
need
got
you
you.
to go, find out about this. I need you to see this through to the end and find out how to fix this, because the things that I do that are related to ADHD bother him and stress him out. So that's what I was saying.
Like what, Erica? I'm keen to hear a bit more. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, not finishing, getting really hyper fixated on something and then not finishing it, or just sort of letting things fizzle out. I tend to be totally fine in sort of chaos. I have good organizational skills in terms of understanding ways to organize things, but in terms of actually keeping things organized, the house is
the motivation to be organized is a different
in a
issue.
constant state of chaos, and that does not bother me. It's just not a priority for me.
Yep.
Really,
I hear you. I understand exactly what you
really
mean.
bothers him staying focused on something that needs to be done, that is not interesting to me, that leads to a lot of things being sort of left halfway done or whatever, or just not ever getting done. I mean, and the decision making thing, I mean, I was telling him, I'm reading all of these things with ADHD about how part of the whole process with this is that with ADHD, you tend to not filter things in the same way that other people do. So rather than things coming in and sort of automatically being prioritized in your brain, everything's kind of coming in at the same volume or the same intensity, and you're sort of trying to go from one thing to the other, and you end up getting very overwhelmed, and that leads to some emotional inconsistency or whatever, because I tend to end up getting very overwhelmed by things that seem very simple,
Trivial.
like
Yeah.
making a decision on what I'm going to eat. That has always
Yes.
been
Yes.
a
Yes.
huge ordeal for me, because I just completely get overwhelmed and lock up and freeze, and I can't figure out what, I don't know. I can't figure out what I'm doing. And I tend to get really emotional over things like that, where on the logic conscious side of my brain, I'm going, this is a very simple thing. It's very simple. There's no reason for me to be feeling so emotional about this. There's no reason for me to be getting so overwhelmed, but that's still what's happening. And that really bothers him. It really bothers him that I can't just make a decision on something, or that I get very overwhelmed in situations that he feels like are very trivial. So there's more, I know, but those are the immediate things that come to mind. But like I was saying earlier, part of what complicates this for me is, yes, I would like to not be overwhelmed in situations that I feel like don't warrant it. That's definitely something that I would like to work on. But there are also aspects of ADHD that I don't particularly consider bad necessarily. It's different, but it's also a part of how I process things. It's a part of how I see things. And so I guess for me, I am recognizing that there are certainly parts of the ADHD experience that are less than ideal, that for myself and for Joe, I would like to, like the sleep thing, I would like to try to figure out how to turn this around, change this, whatever. But holistically, I don't necessarily see ADHD as this big problem that needs to be completely turned around in its entirety and like eliminated. There are parts of it that I see as beneficial, as just different. Okay, yes, that's not how a lot of other people do things or think about things, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. But I think that adds a layer of complication into the mix when you have a partner who does not experience things this way, and who does get stressed out by your difference in the way that you see things. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and am in the process of sort of trying to figure out how to navigate, making sure that I do want to be very cognizant of Joe's feelings in all of this, and be empathetic toward his part in this situation. But I also am recognizing that I don't necessarily see ADHD and some of the effects that it has on the way that I experience things or think about things as being a problem necessarily. So that adds some complication in when you have a partner.
So I suspect from Joe, and just knowing how he is, it's not the thing itself, but how you deal with it.
Well, yes. Yeah, but I guess that's part of, I don't know. I still have a lot of thinking to do on this, but I think that's part of the complication with all of this, is that how I deal with things, I think in many cases is affected by.
Yes, it's all interrelated.
Yeah.
Very interesting, Erica. So, just as a recommendation, I don't think the chaos itself is the problem, to a certain extent, but we can manage chaos, right? So that goes a long way in dealing with it. So, if you focus on eliminating chaos, that may be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But if you focus on managing it, that's a whole different reality.
Right.
Yeah. And it's a quantum difference in the energy involved. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So I would really recommend, that as just a conception there, as a strategy, chaos management, in one of those managements, very, very, very powerful. Yeah.
Right.
Very useful. Very useful. Very, very useful. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. Very cool stuff. You know, when you think of it through now, right? The difference between, eliminating chaos and managing it, it's huge, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So simple sometimes, isn't it?
Yes.
It fascinates me. Absolutely fascinates me. How just a simple shift can make such a huge, massive difference. Yeah.
Right.
Incredible to me. Really incredible. I never cease to get tired of it, you know. It's just too fantastic. Too fantastic. Very cool stuff. Very, very cool. Yeah. So, attention management and association management, this is why they are so powerful to me, because it's all about where I selectively use my energy and attention, right? So I can get immersed in something in particular, but I can also, just as a matter of choice and strategy, get immersed in saying, hey, you know what? I want to be immersed in variety.
Right.
See, so now I'm still getting immersed, but I am being immersed in variety, and I'm getting immersed in shifting things, shifting from one thing to another. So when you look at it in that context, I'm now utilizing and turning the disadvantage into an advantage again.
Right. Right.
It's so powerful. It's so incredibly powerful. It's just too incredible to me. And that's where the naming of things becomes so powerful.
Right.
That's all I've done, really. Is just shift the naming of it, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Relabeling.
Right.
Very powerful.
Associating, sort of, or
yeah, reassociating, relabeling, renaming, yes. And
understanding of it.
And the ridiculous power of context shifting. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. So and abstract, right? That's the other thing that's really powerful here. The abstract of it all. This is unbelievably huge. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've shifted it from a particular to an abstract. Yeah. A single instance to a bigger overview perspective.
Right.
And that abstracting things to look at that bigger picture, boy, that's helped me so much. Like I said, right now, in this instance, you shift from being immersed in whatever it is to being immersed in variety, being immersed in shifting things, changing, doing things little bits, doing multiple things, but continuing. I'm immersed in developing the skill, for instance, of running 3-4 projects at the same time and finishing all of them. Right? It's astonishing how that zoomed out perspective is so incredibly powerful. I can't get enough of it. The power that abstracting has for me, overview perspective, and relabeling, reformatting it. It's just too fantastic. So useful to me. So useful. And again, it's taking understanding your skill and leveraging it to the best, right? That's the key. That's the key here, is to understand the skill, to see it not as a detriment, but as a tool. Same thing with ego. It's a tool. It's a tool.
Right.
Right. Same deal. Use it, strategically or not. That's it. So when we get out of seeing this thing as a problem, but to see it as something that is a tool that can be very beneficial if used strategically.
Right.
That's the key, right? So, first of all, it's a diagnosis, but it's not a diagnosis of problem. No. It is a diagnosis of a gift that needs to be utilized, like any talent needs to be utilized. You know the TV show Monk, yeah?
Yes.
Well, there's somebody who, leverages his severe OCD
Right.
into, it's what makes him a good detective, right? He needs that order. He needs things to be right. He can't rest until his things are right in his world, which means that things are resolved, right? So it's so powerful when we develop this strategy, for turning a disadvantage into an advantage. I absolutely love it. It's one of my greatest joys and powers is doing this. I get so much out of it. It's too fantastic for me. Just absolutely love it. Real power, real power.
Absolutely.
Leverage, 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 leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness.
By the way, how do you sleep when Joe's not around?
Either about the same or worse, I would say.
Oh, it does. Or worse. Oh, interesting. Wow. Huh. Very interesting. Wow.
I have never liked being by myself at night. Like I don't know, but that has always affected my sleep a lot. I get very sort of hyper aware of my surroundings and of what's going on when there's no one else with me. And that does not make for good sleep. I end up sort of like waking up at the smallest sound or whatever.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing, when it comes to sleep. I think that, I think my sleep sort of got a bit more messed up when I started to be paying attention, get immersed in the fact that I'm not falling asleep. Right.
Oh,
So just,
right.
yeah. So that's why I'm really making this effort now to, I've sort of tolerated this for the longest time and it's inappropriate. So now I'm really making an effort to develop new skills, new abilities, which is to learn to fall asleep when I'm not sleepy or tired. At least when I don't think I'm sleepy or tired. It's just that the power of immersion is so great that, even a little, just a movement from going where I'm falling on my face planting into the keyboard and from going from the ear to the bed, that little bit of activity wakes me up.
Right.
And then I get immersed in feeling awake and now I aggravate the feeling of awake. It's just the same tendency. I just need to use it appropriately. So I have been getting some success with this, learning to fall asleep.
Right. Well, good.
Yeah. It's cool. So a lot we can do, when we use our skills, our power, our superpowers, because this is a superpower, right?
Right.
Yeah. When we use it positively. That's the big thing that I'm trying to say. It's the same consistent theme every time, right? Exactly the same theme, that we are going to take this superpower that we have and use it appropriately. Yeah. That's it. It's the same pattern over and over and over again. Whenever we have a problem, we say, "Oh, I'm using my superpower inappropriately." That's it, really. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like it.
Very like that. Very like that.
Yeah.
Really cool. Really
Me
cool.
too. Me too.
It just changes everything so magically, it really does. It just makes such a difference.
Absolutely.
And why not? Why not use it as a power? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we know it works in so many other things. why not use it in this specific instance? Yes.
Absolutely. Whoops.
Transformative stuff. Yes.
Absolutely.
So it's all part, again, the same thing, like I was saying, emphasis management, association management, attention management, and relabeling, renaming, and strategy. I mean, the key strategy here is the strategy of turning a disadvantage into an advantage.
Right.
Yeah. Again, it's tool management, because really it's not an advantage or a disadvantage. Really, it's only because we don't know better. Really, but in much of our lives, it's an advantage.
Right.
Just in some aspects, it's disadvantageous. We just need to make it advantageous across the board.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Quite fascinating.
I've got to go outside real quick and see.
Sure, no problem.
One of our hens, I thought, was egg bound. And so I've been having to keep an eye on her, and I think she just laid an egg, which would be exciting. But I've got to go out and check, and so the Wi-Fi may get kind of funky, but it'll only take me a minute. So if my connection gets weird, I'll be back.
No problem. If you want to switch to the phone and show me what you're doing with the chicken, that'd be fun.
Well, I'm taking my computer.
Oh, because I mean, unless it's a big hassle, don't worry about it otherwise. There you are, out in the nature. It's always so nice to see you like this. I don't know, it's always nice. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice change of scenery. Did you say she was egg bound? Is that what I heard you say? Egg bound?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that expression before.
And it looks like sitting on the nest, but I don't think that's her egg. So.
Did it not do what?
Let me get back inside. I'm sure this is getting wonky.
Which hen is it, by the way?
Gertie, black and white. Okay. Let me get back in here and get back in the connection.
Love those trees, Erica. Just love those trees.
Mm-hmm.
Careful.
Okay.
Look close to your head there.
So egg bound is when they get an egg stuck in their. What is that called?
Wow. I never heard of that. Wow.
It can actually kill them if you don't
so
handle
they get an obstruction. It becomes an obstruction, in other words.
Yes, and it can cause major problems for them if you don't correct it within the first several days. And it's been like 2 days, and I thought that maybe she was sitting on the nesting box, and I thought she laid an egg, but I think the egg belongs to a different chicken. Wow. So I'm gonna have to keep an eye on her and see what happens. So
how would you free this blockage?
You have to give them Epsom salt baths and extra calcium, and eventually that tends to loosen things up enough to get the egg out. But sometimes you have to take them to the vet and have them try to get it out. So
and what do they do? Just kind of squeeze it out?
I have no idea. Oh. So I'm probably going to have to go out and give her another bath when we get off the Zoom call. She hasn't made progress.
Wow. I mean, I had chickens. I never observed it with the chickens. They laid eggs and everything. I never observed this happening, and and never heard anybody mention it either. I thought when you said egg bound, it was just a different way of saying broody. Wow, fascinating.
Huh. Well,
most intriguing indeed.
Oh yeah, that was there at that point. Okay.
So what alerted you to this in the first place?
She just was acting a bit unusual. It's hard to describe. I mean, she you just get used to the way that the chickens are,
You notice the change in pattern, in other words.
Yeah, so she was just being, she wasn't doing anything in particular that was like super problematic, but just being unusual. And she was exhibiting a few signs that seemed consistent with egg-bound hens. So
interesting.
I've been trying to keep an eye on her, but it could be something completely unrelated. There's no telling.
Oh. I'm always intrigued. I like learning stuff, it's quite fascinating.
Yes.
I just, what really intrigues me is that, it's one of those, we were talking about non-obvious things, right? And isn't this an utterly, completely non-obvious thing that you would not think that a chicken's egg could get stuck coming out? It just doesn't seem, realistic or feasible, yeah?
I mean, it's not really all that surprising to me, just understanding now how all of that works. It's not that unobvious of a thing, but it is, I mean, for certainly if you're just thinking about chickens in general, that's probably not something that most people would assume would be a thing.
Well, you just think the nature of I suppose if it could get in, sideways, it turns or something, and then, so I could see how it could get stuck. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it would be something that happens easily. But I suppose it isn't very common.
It's not something that happens like all the time.
It's not common.
Well, it's not. It's interesting. It's not necessarily uncommon.
Right.
Across the board for chickens, but it is not a super common thing for one hen to have that happen like frequently.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Cool. Well, I hope it works out good with her. All right. So tell me about the ADHD. What do you understand it to be?
Okay. Well, let's see. We talked about this on Tuesday a bit, but like Tank, lie down. What are you doing? Thank you. Lie down.
Bloody hell.
Oh my word. Anyway, we talked about this on Tuesday about the whole dopamine thing. And so, from what I understand, it's just a difference in the way that we produce and process dopamine. It's a deficit as compared to other people in terms of the amount of dopamine that we have in our bodies, I think, and how our bodies process and create that chemical, which it's really interesting for me. The way I understand it is, in many cases, most people, I don't understand this well enough from my research to know the specifics, but from what I think I understand, most people I don't know if they just have regular dopamine production without a stimulant necessarily. Like, there doesn't necessarily have to be something that stimulates the creation of dopamine. Your brain just does that on a regular basis, or whether it's that people who are neurotypical get dopamine, produce dopamine from normal everyday tasks. But in either case, most people who are neurotypical have a larger supply of dopamine in their brain. Yeah. And so for people with ADHD, because we don't get the same kind of stimulation, or we just don't produce dopamine at the same rate or whatever, it's common for people with ADHD to seek out things that are really interesting to them all the time, to get immersed in things that are really interesting to them and not want to stop doing that thing, to change attention and focus frequently from one thing that interests them to another and not pay attention to the things that don't, because your brain is sort of constantly in a state of seeking dopamine production. So you are sort of continuously looking for whatever is going to stimulate dopamine production. And most of the time, that is something that's really interesting to you. But it could also be, I forget, I was reading something this morning that said there was like a specific term for this, but it could be new experiences. Like, I think for me, that's a big thing. You know, I tend to need variety in order for dopamine production to be happening. So, you know, I think some people with ADHD don't necessarily need the variety, the new experience. They just find something that's really interesting to them and they super hyper focus on that one thing. And that just, you know, kind of keeps them going, and they have difficulty focusing on anything else. For me, I tend to do a lot of bouncing around, where if I stay on one thing too long, it doesn't create dopamine anymore. And so I go on to something else, and then something else, and then something else. And I'm sort of constantly looking for some new stimulant. For some people, addiction is something that really spurs this dopamine production. And I was reading something that said the statistics now are like 1 in 4 or 5 people who struggle with addiction are usually also suffering from ADHD. And apparently something I was listening to this morning said part of the reason for that is that when you look at the structure of a brain with addiction and the structure of a brain with ADHD, they're very similar. And so it kind of naturally, it sort of naturally lends itself. I think if you have ADHD, you tend to be more prone to addictive type behaviors. If you have addictive behaviors, it's most likely, you know, related to something with ADHD. So, you know, that is also a factor. But yeah, basically, apparently people who are neurotypical just get regular dopamine from everyday tasks or just from doing nothing. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works.
I think they just produce it automatically, probably.
Right. You know, however it gets to them in a different way than it does for people with ADHD. And so our behaviors tend to be different from people who are neurotypical because we're sort of constantly seeking an activity that stimulates dopamine production.
Okay, so now we understand the underlying root cause. How does it translate typically into behavior?
Right. Well, so like I was saying, I think you tend to fixate on things that are interesting to you, or that whatever brings you dopamine, right? Whatever is interesting to you, whatever brings that up, whatever creates that in your brain, whatever stimulates the happy chemicals, you know, serotonin, all of that stuff. People with ADHD tend to spend much more time focusing on the activities that do that for them and not doing anything else. So struggling to get other things done, do things around the house, make appointments, you know, be motivated to do schoolwork, to do really anything that does not have an immediate dopamine effect. People with ADHD tend to struggle to do those things because their brain is in dopamine seeking mode. So do what?
Oh, no, I just was going to speculate that these activities don't actually do a very good job of the dopamine production. So when we're always at a constant deficiency. When we find something that actually does alleviate that, we get immersed into it because it's we're trying to actually satisfy, and because it gives
Right.
a little,
Well,
we
and I
think,
think,
doing it more, we're trying to get it to do it, but it doesn't help. It
well,
does help, a little bit, but
right.
doesn't resolve it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think basically in order for that to work, I mean, like I was saying, I don't really understand the specifics of how this works, but however it works for people who are neurotypical, they are obviously able to maintain an adequate amount of dopamine just at normal times, right? They don't need to be constantly in a state of stimulation in order to be producing dopamine. I think for people with ADHD, I'm not sure that it's necessarily that the activities that we're choosing does a bad job of producing dopamine. I think it could be, I mean, it's possible, but I think there's also a factor of where people who are neurotypical do something fun, it creates dopamine, great, but then they also are getting dopamine from doing other things. For people with ADHD, you need, in order to continue getting the dopamine, you need to continue doing the thing that's stimulating to you. As soon as you stop, that goes away. So you're sort of constantly having to be in a state of stimulation, in a state of
Yeah.
motion.
Yeah.
You can't stop doing that thing without having a negative side effect.
Yeah. So there's not in other words, it's not like a carryover, right?
Right.
In other words, when you stop, it needs to be, it doesn't, you don't build up a supply of it, a resource of it.
As far as I understand, I mean, that may not, my understanding of it may not be accurate, but from what I understand, that seems to be a big part of it. There's also implications of overstimulation that, part of what comes along with ADHD is the way that you process input and, giving priority to things that require priority. That's a big part of ADHD that, your brain typically will sort of learn how to, on the fly, prioritize different things that are coming in. And they were talking about, like if you're in a room where there's multiple conversations being had, someone is running a coffee maker, there's a dog barking, there's a baby crying, there's, TV on, whatever, and you're trying to have a conversation with someone, generally speaking, our brains are designed to learn how to prioritize different inputs and deprioritize the others. And with ADHD, that doesn't seem to work the same way. And so you end up getting all of the input at the same level, and you're having to sort of consciously, I mean, this is something that for most people, this isn't a subconscious thing. Your brain just filters things out, and by the time something gets to you, it's because your brain has prioritized that. But for people with ADHD, often it all comes at you at the same intensity, and you have to really concentrate on whatever thing it is that you really want to be concentrating on. And that is definitely a thing for me. It's interesting that not in all cases. There are times where I can be in a place where there's multiple things going on and it's not a problem for me at all, but it tends to be about when I really need to be focusing on whatever one specific thing is necessary. That becomes a problem for me. I was laughing, talking to Mom last night about how a lot of times I can be, I don't feel overstimulated when I'm in like a large crowd of people and there's all kinds of different noises. If I'm just there and I'm just sort of having fun, doing whatever, relaxing, that's not a problem at all. But as soon as I need to be paying attention to one specific input, then it becomes an issue. So like, for example, I was sitting on the couch the other day, Joe had the TV on, I was looking at something on my phone. There were multiple sort of noises going on in the background, and that was fine. But then Joe, we were trying to order something in for dinner, and Joe had the menu up of some restaurant, and he like handed it over to me and said, okay, take a look at this. And I immediately, I said, I'm sorry, but I need you to like turn the TV off. We need to stop the other noises because I cannot focus on making a decision about this with all this other stuff going on.
Wow.
So that's definitely something that comes along with, is just sort of the ability to, not necessarily the ability to consciously prioritize. Like, I think what it is that you want to be prioritizing, but there's a really fascinating subconscious process that your brain typically does to filter out things that are not of importance at the moment. And that process does not seem to occur normally with people in ADHD. So it's not that you don't know what's important, it's just that everything is coming into you at the same level.
Interesting.
Which is really interesting.
So when we combine, attention management, association management, and all emotion management, it really becomes concentration, and we can learn it, in other words. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think the big key there is understanding how to combat this non-conscious process that's normally being handled by your brain. If your brain is not filtering these things out correctly, can you, at a conscious level, deprioritize different inputs that are coming in? Or, how do you get around that? Or do you just need to be aware of the fact that this is an issue and say, okay, I know that when I need to be concentrating on something, I need to make sure I'm in an environment that's conducive to that. I need to minimize all other inputs. I need to go be in some place that's quiet so that I can focus on this, because I know that, this is an issue. But I don't know, that'll be interesting to see what can be made.
But, awareness of it, that's step one. Because If we can identify it, then we can strategize and we can find ways to deal with it. So if we know that, hey, it's a concentration issue, concentration is just a different form of emotion. So, it's just deliberately immersing into something, then we can do it, right?
Right. Absolutely. And let's see. So, what else did I have here? Oh, memory. So that's another interesting one. I haven't delved into the specifics of what people think are behind the specific memory issues with ADHD. If it's an issue in the way our brain is processing. I mean, I'm sure it is, because that's a key part of what I had been reading, was that the function of dopamine, or a function of dopamine in our brain, is transmitting information between neurotransmitters. And so when we don't have that level of dopamine, not only does it make us not feel good, but we also are not firing on all cylinders, because the information that needs to get from one neurotransmitter to the other has nothing to pass it on.
Wow.
I would imagine that is probably part of what contributes to the memory issue thing. That's certainly a factor for me. It's a major factor for my mom. I know she's talked about that in sessions with me about her memory issues. It's interesting that for me, I was just thinking about this yesterday. I definitely think I had a very different experience as a child than my mom did with ADHD, because something that's really fascinating to me is that there are some things that I think I displayed that I understand now were probably tied to ADHD, but in large part, I don't think a lot of the typical symptoms that happen for kids with ADHD really happened for me.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about why that would be. And I think in large part, this is really interesting because it ties into something that you and I have talked about, that I also talked about with Kathy. In my experience in childhood, I remember, I know we talked about this at some point, it's been a while, but I remember as a kid being really good at school and doing really well, with learning in general, and feeling like an imposter of sorts because I had no explanation for why I was good at this. It wasn't like I was spending an inordinate amount of energy or focus on learning. I had no explanation for why I was good at learning. And I would get all of this praise from my mom, from my grandma, from my teachers, oh, she's so good. Oh, she just blah, 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 blah. And I wasn't doing anything consciously. That was just the way I was learning. And it made me really nervous and feel like it wasn't real somehow, because I was like, I have no explanation for how I can do this or why this is happening. And so it's not like this is something that I feel like I have control over. And so I was constantly afraid that it would just stop working and all of a sudden I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. And it's so interesting. I was thinking yesterday that I think that probably something that was at the heart of my ability to do so well in school when I was younger was I seem to have had an unusually good ability to convert things from short-term memory to long-term memory.
Yeah.
I could look at something.
Same here.
Yeah, I could look at something one time and like, boom, got it. There you go. And so it was not a deliberate thing. It wasn't an energy, it wasn't like I was just putting way more effort into learning and therefore I was really good at it. It was just something that my brain was doing on its own.
I can even grade that ability.
What? Yeah, exactly.
I can even grade it. It's a C+ ability for me.
Right.
That's how I did all my exams at school. I'd read the book once and then I got a C+ out of it.
And I see, but for me, and what was weird was I was getting A's, like all A's. I mean, I would just boom, boom. And so it put me at this level where I was constantly being praised by teachers, by whoever. Oh, look at how smart she is. Look at how good. Oh, she just does so well. And it made me feel like a total imposter because I had no explanation for why I was doing any better than any of my peers, because it wasn't something I was doing on purpose. That was just how I learned. And that became a source of a lot of problems for me, I think, because it made me feel like this could just go away at any moment. And I had no understanding of why this was happening. And I also happened to be really good at taking tests, I think, related to the whole memory thing. And interestingly, I think it was in high school. It could have been exacerbated by all of the craziness that was happening at that point in my life with Phil and everything else. But I think at some point in high school, that stopped being a thing. And my brain was no longer doing this like super job of converting things from short-term memory to long-term memory. And really ever since then, I feel like it's gotten sort of progressively worse, that my short-term memory has become worse and worse and worse. And so now I am experiencing a lot of the typical memory issues that as a kid, what normally is present with kids with ADHD, that was not happening with me. And somehow, that process in my brain is not firing in the same way. And so I am experiencing now a lot of the memory issues that I didn't when I was younger.
Yeah.
And difficulty with sleep is a big one. I think from some things I've read, that's in part, we talked about this, but in part related to that need for constant stimulation. You know, you, like you were saying, you're not getting the same levels of dopamine production when you're asleep that you do when you're focusing on something that you really enjoy. So you don't want to go to sleep because you want to keep getting more dopamine. But I think also there seems to be a correlation with this sort of overstimulation, understimulation cycle of hyperfixating on something too much, which overstimulates us, which sends us into an energy crash. But when we're in the energy crash, we don't want to sleep because we want to get back to doing something that's interesting to us. So even when we're low energy, we struggle with sleep. And when we're sleeping, it doesn't necessarily, it may rebuild our bodily energy reserves, but it doesn't rebuild our dopamine reserves. And so we still feel unmotivated, sort of tapped, lagging, not firing on all cylinders, because even when we're rested bodily, we're not getting everything we need from a brain perspective. What else?
So, you know, when they talk about remedies for this, the typical remedies are what?
Well, I don't know. I haven't
Treatments.
really gotten this far. I know that there are a lot of different medications that can be recommended, but because the symptoms of ADHD are really varying, there's an equally variety of medications to treat ADHD. There's lots and lots of different combinations of things that people do. So one of the things I am planning to look into is what are all of the various recommended treatments. I know a lot of it is medication, some of it is kind of cognitive behavior therapy type things. There's, I think, a myriad of different treatments that are recommended.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So it seems to me that there's no real specific definitive treatment for it as yet. Yeah. It's a kind of individual.
There's not like one, you know, if you take this one drug, anyone with ADHD is going to be perfect. It's
right.
It's not
right.
an exact.
Yeah. I assumed, you know, from what you were saying before, there's a whole variety of drugs, but I was wondering if there are other treatments besides drugs for it, maybe.
The only thing, I mean, like I said, I think generally speaking, it's recommended to do a combination of different things. Cognitive behavior therapy that I mentioned before is one. I've seen some alternative treatments of basically retraining the brain to form new sort of pathways and connections for stimulation. But I've seen a lot of mixed results on the longevity of that in terms of its success. But I'm not sure. I haven't gotten to that place in my research yet. So we'll see.
You know, it's very interesting how, for me, you know, discipline has been such a very big factor. You know, I feel it's a huge skill that I acquired, and I had to learn it. You know, it was something I really had to work hard on.
That's one of the really interesting things that I have seen is that people with ADHD have a very interesting relationship with routine, that you need routine and discipline in order to combat a lot of the tendencies that people with ADHD have in getting off track of what they're doing. So routine becomes very important to someone with ADHD, but routine and discipline and these type of things are also often the exact thing that does not bring much dopamine production for people with ADHD. So it becomes this interesting catch-22 where you have to find an appropriate way to motivate yourself to be disciplined and have a routine, because it's necessary, but something that's sort of kryptonite for someone with ADHD.
Interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, for me, I use the discipline to manage my immersion and to concentrate, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
And, use the discipline to finish things, to stick with it, to essentially force my attention to immerse.
Right.
Because I noticed that it's just in that beginning, early stages where it's so problematic.
Right.
Yeah. It's not overall, it's getting into it in the first place.
Right.
It's the same thing with sleep, really. It's not the sleeping itself that's the problem. It's falling asleep that's the problem. The immersion, in other words. Yeah.
Right.
I find that very fascinating. So that's where the discipline comes into it, which is really, like with the falling asleep, it's doing something that I don't want to do. And the discipline, I just force myself to do it. Okay,
right.
Here you go.
Well, and so, I think for me, one of the things I've been thinking about is it's really helpful to have ADHD as a potential explanation for why you don't want to do something. Because I think for me, that was a big part of my issue with a lot of these things was, I don't understand why this is so hard for me. Logically, I want to do this. I know it needs to be done, but it's like moving through quicksand or like pulling teeth to get me to actually do this. And and that was part of what led to a lot of frustration for me, was just not understanding why I was experiencing that. And so just having the knowledge that, okay, I understand why I don't want to do this. It's because my brain is telling me I need more dopamine. I would rather be spending my energy doing something that's giving me dopamine. But now that I'm aware of that, I can say, no, I understand that. And I understand why I'm feeling like crap right now, but I do need to do this. And I can find a way to use, association management or something else to make this task more enjoyable. But, just the understanding of why your brain is telling you, I don't want to do this, or I really want to do that, really helps somehow.
Yeah. So, I leveraged reason and logic. For me, they were always very important. And I refused to accept that irrationality. It bothered me. And it led me to a real perspective on life, actually, to, or at least an understanding that maybe it's just my own particularness, but I don't see, I think we live in this giant lunatic asylum, the galaxies or the universe's lunatic asylum, because I don't see anybody that I've ever met which I can say is 100% sane.
Right.
I see people on a regular basis doing things which are irrational and illogical, including myself. And it's really intriguing to me. Now, the things where I do it, they're not particularly a big deal, so I don't worry about it. But I refuse to be irrational and illogic on things that do matter. So I don't know. I just, I guess, made it a point of pride, and to leverage, my own pride, as it were, in this particular way, because otherwise, it would just be very problematical.
Right. Absolutely.
So very intriguing, this. Right now that I think about it in this context, like I said, I really worked very, very hard at this. It bothered me when I was. That's the start when I was investigating the awareness. I said, my goodness, I mean, I'm going to get a hiding for this. This is just doesn't make any sense, the thing that triggered me on it was, or that really leveraged me very powerfully, and it was quite a while after I'd started the study, was in PE. We used to call it PT, but same thing, right? PE class. So in PE class, we had to have PE shorts, that you had to wear, and the old style shorts, the ones that the Magnum used to wear. I don't know if you ever watched the TV series Magnum. Magnum PI. It's an old show. It's
I know I've seen it, but I'm trying to picture.
Yeah, anyway, so he wore these shorts all the time, and today they just seem quite improbable, but that was standard uniform at the time, right? Well, anyway, so when you go to PE class, you had to have PE shorts, and that's it. You didn't have to have the vest. You could just go bare chested, but you had to have the shorts. And if you didn't, you get a hiding. Isn't that fascinating?
Nice.
So anyway, if you forget them, which I did occasionally, you could borrow from somebody and, panic. Oh my God, PE class coming out. I forgot my PE short. Okay, now you scramble to borrow some from somebody else who's in a different class, and they have it at a different time. All right. And sometimes those will be all sweaty and soggy and be a miserable business, but what can you do? It's better than a hiding. Yeah. So I never did get into trouble for it, fortunately. Right. But still, it horrified me that something which is happening on a regular basis, twice a week, that I would be regularly forgetting this. How is this possible? It made no sense to me. So that really shifted me. And, I just started to be more disciplined, more focused with this, and to pay attention to understand this longer term context and to look beyond the now and stuff like this. It really led to a massive restructuring of everything I was doing. So that really was very powerful incentive. Quite amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. It wasn't so much not getting the hiding. It was my horror at the irrationality of it, the unnecessariness of it. That's what bothered me. And that was a very powerful motivator. I said, I refuse to be a dumbass like, the other guys that got hidings regularly. Right. No, at least I managed to get, find a way to remedy it by borrowing this. And I was at least had a little bit of ahead of the time strategic awareness, because, the ones that did get the canings, they would only discover that they'd forgotten it when you get to class, get to PE class, and it's too late then. So at least I had a little bit of my awareness was set to, look ahead of me a couple of hours, but I needed to set it to be a little bit more longer term. So very fascinating to me, at least. It's really intriguing how the whole thing worked.
Yeah. Yes.
And so it was simply a matter of adjusting the time frame of my anticipation. My time frame was set to the time frame that I basically needed to anticipate bullies. Mm-hmm. I didn't need to anticipate the bully the next day. It's just in the day, around you. But so as soon as I adjusted the time frame, and then of course when I started to think things through and get more thorough, I applied that anticipation to more of a lifetime context. And then you get into the whole impeccability, death management, awareness, living your life strategically as a life, not as a day to day.
Right.
Living your life as an entirety, and then you get into the sophisticated strategies and all of it. So well, this is now just the early days, the start of it. So it's really cool to see how that works. Yeah. So context shifting, that is, the time frame shifting too. This was very key. It really that the ineffective thinking very much is a consequence so often of an inappropriate time frame focus. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very, very intriguing. So this skill, I use it quite regularly. I got to say, and this is the skill of shifting. It's context shifting, but it's really more a skill of rearranging the elements of an equation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, if it doesn't work in one way, okay, so you got E equal MC squared. Well, you also got, M is E divided by C squared. It's the same thing, but expressed differently. That different expression gives us a massively different perspective and ability to deal with it and utilize it and be strategic and all sorts of other magical things. Huh?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Really, really useful.
Absolutely.
Really, really useful.
Absolutely.
So we tend to sort of assume that we're solving for one thing, but we can actually, rearrange the elements and solve for something else entirely.
Right. Yeah.
And that I absolutely love that. It's helped me so much that I'm now actually doing something different than what I originally thought I was doing.
Right.
And that's so useful. It is so, 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 so useful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a bit, it's kind of a creative thing as well, and that's what I like about it. It just, instead of you say, okay, I got a problem and I'm looking to solve it this way, and not working. Let me see if I can come at it from a completely different angle, and then you do, and then suddenly, okay, I just love that. It's so cool, and helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, like I was saying, shifting the time context.
Right.
Really, really cool.
Absolutely.
Trying to think of a nice example of it, a better example.
Nice. Ooh. Oh, Lord have mercy. Now I have something in my eye. Ugh. Why is that like the worst possible place to get something stuck? Our eyeballs are so sensitive.
Yeah, same. I get stuff in my eyes too, and I struggle to get it out sometimes.
And it's so, that's like, you get a little itch or something, that's one thing, but getting something in your eye is like the most distracting. You have to stop everything you're doing.
This whole thing really has me thinking very deeply on it. Yeah. The other thing that I find too is the intent to solve a problem, or the will to resolution, really. I tend to get very obstinate when it comes to solving problems. I refuse to give up on them. And that's really saved me in so many situations. Just absolute refusal to have a problem remain a problem and not resolve it. Really big deal.
Yeah.
Really helpful. And now that I look at it in this context, it really mitigates against the effects of the ADHD. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's that peculiar stubbornness, because it's an immersion on resolution, right?
True.
Which is that overview abstract. I mean, I've really made an effort to make resolution absolutely critically important to me, because I don't want to waste my time.
Right.
If I don't continue to resolution, all my efforts before have wasted my time, right? Yeah.
True. Very true. Oh, goodness. Oh, man. Yikes. Whoops. Where did that go? Oh, my word.
Powerful stuff, Erica. Powerful, powerful, powerful stuff.
I agree.
Yeah. So I'm still curious to see if, you know, there are resolutions to this that are, you know, non-typical chemical issues.
Right. Me too.
That'd be very interesting to see.
Yes.
Very interesting to see.
I am curious as well. We'll see what I find in my research.
I'm very keen to see. Very keen to see.
I was telling Kathy yesterday that I would like to go talk with a doctor to get an actual diagnosis, because I've seen a lot of things that have said, you know, ADHD symptoms are so varying and often come along with, so, you know, if you do have ADHD, it comes along with a lot of other sort of related things as well, that it's easy to mistake something for ADHD that might be something else. And so I would like to go talk to somebody to get an actual diagnosis from someone who like knows what they're talking about.
Have you set an appointment to do this?
Well, so I was, I have been trying to find a doctor that has like good testimonials and reviews from people about someone who like is sort of diligent about their process and about you know, not just like
this is something that needs to be thoroughly researched. This is very critical.
Not just like throwing medication at you, and that they you know, they look at it from sort of a holistic perspective. And I have yet to find anything in what I'm looking for there. So I'm still on the hunt for someone that I think would be good to go talk to. But that is my next step, is trying to find someone that I think I can go speak with and see what sort of resources they recommend. So we'll see.
Did Kathy have anything else to say about it?
She said she only knew one psychiatrist and they were not accepting new patients, and that she was generally not a big fan of psychiatrists in general, and was definitely not a big fan of the drugs that are typically prescribed for ADHD. So
are they typically only available through the psychiatrist? Sorry to interrupt you.
I think, I'm not sure. I haven't gotten that far in my research yet, so I don't know, but
very interesting. Interesting. And did she have any comments on wave impeccability as a way of dealing with it?
Oh yeah, she was super excited that that I was excited about having these tools and things.
I mean, if I think of it now, you know, I mean, boy, every single thing, you know, for me, it's been really managing this. I find it so fascinating. Really find it so fascinating. You know, like I said, the only thing that I haven't really successfully managed is the sleep. Now, most of my life, you know, it wasn't all that much of a problem. You know, I got by, but because I was so really proficient at immersion, you know, that I basically ended up distracting myself from the downsides of lack of sleep. You know, so you know, I made it tolerable rather than, you know, sort of a good thing. You know, I just put up with it and found ways to work around it, and just accepted it sort of as a part of who I am and what my life is. But it's not ideal, you know. So, you know, and I see it obviously more now as I get older, and the the differences are noticeable now. They stand out a bit more. When I was younger, I could deal with it a bit easier. I have natural high energy. Like when I was in the restaurant, oh my God, I got by with so little sleep. It was terrible.
Right.
It was painful in the mornings to get up and go and open the restaurant so that the day shift can come in and do all the prep work and the cleaning and stuff. It was physically pain. Just walking one block, my body was like so heavy and that. Oh, it was torture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember it very clearly. Oh dear.
Yeah.
But still, like I said, on the overall, I learned to live with low energy, as it were, low physical energy. I didn't change my emotional energy, my intent energy, my focus energy. Those skills just got better and better, but it didn't help for the physical part of it.
Right. Yep. I know. It's interesting.
Now I do need
I'm looking
those.
forward to seeing what else I find in my research, and
Me too.
some different and varied ways of working on this. So we'll see.
Yeah, very cool, Erica. I'm very keen to hear more detail.
Yeah.
I'm very keen to hear more detail. Again, I'm sort of in a thinking mode. I know it's different. The whole session, I feel unresolved in this case yet. You know what I mean? It's not finished yet. There's missing pieces of this puzzle. I feel a little bit. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Which is a good feeling, because that's what makes me keep going.
Right.
I leverage that until I get that resolution. I hate wasting my time. And that's the thing too, by the way, from a strategic leverage point of view. Boy, if I think of one of the things that really make a difference, it's this mindset of strategic leverage, particularly leverage. So the way I leverage myself to finish things is through focusing on my absolute loathing of wasting my time.
Right.
Yeah. So instead of focusing on, it's a slog to finish, I focus on, I don't want to be wasting my time. So I finish. Right. So that's what I mean. You come at the same thing from a different angle.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You shift the elements of the equation, and suddenly now, I'm focused on the tail end of the equation rather than the head end, and voila, I've got a solution. And my motivation shifts as a result. Right? Just through that perspective shifting, my motivation shifts. Now I'm motivated to finish because I don't want to waste my time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very, very, very cool. I refuse to waste my time by not finishing.
Right. I like it.
Yeah, I really make an effort, and it really helps me. It gets me, like all these big projects, like doing the programs. I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise because of that. They're fun to start, but you get into them, not so much.
It's true. Very true.
Same with the writing, I mean, I made a real effort to finish some of I have lots of things that are unfinished, but I don't mind because I know the work that needs to be done to finish them. It's not a lot, and it's time and circumstance. I don't need to finish them right now. The things that are essential are there. The fleshing out, that can be done anytime. So I've also leveraged my energy to use it to basically condense the thing, to use my energy in the tasks that make the difference. It's the core conception of a story, fleshing it out a little bit, that you've got the basics of the story, to finalize it and, formula. Anybody can do that. Any competent, rewriter can flesh it out for you once you've got the core elements, and enough of it, not just a outline. When you've got, like I explained the story to you, like Saving America or whatever, the Adventureman, there's more than enough there, just the details. That's easy for anybody to do. So that's why it's again, strategic usage of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I've got to jump off of here and go check on 30 before.
Very cool, Erica. Very cool. I'm keen to get back to finish up with the company diplomacy and then do the immersion mention. But this is important. So I'm very happy to do the sideline focus on this. Yeah. And I do feel it needs quite a lot of attention because, like I said, I feel there's missing stuff that's not in the literature that we have to figure out and connect the dots. Yes?
Absolutely. I agree.
Most brilliant, Erica. Most brilliant. I love it.
Me too.
All right, see you tomorrow, maybe, or not. I don't know.
Yes. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. No problem. All good. Either way. Yeah.
All right.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Bye-bye, Erica. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.